Welcome everyone to our webinar today titled Improving Archival Work Through Collections Management Systems. My name is Emmanuel and I'm the Business Development Team Leader here at Lucidea. At Lucidea, we work with museums, archives and library, and other informational professionals to provide better access and visibility to their collections and enabling them diverse audience to access and engage with their collection. I will also be moderating the webinar and your questions today. And obviously with me today is our presenter as well, Margot Note. Before we start, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, to make sure we get as much value from this webinar in this short amount of time with Margot, our lines are muted at this moment. Now, that doesn't mean we don't love you or don't want to hear from you at all. In fact, we encourage you to go to the question and answer widget and type your question so that we can address them later on. And lastly, for those of you who may want to revisit this content or webinar again, rest assured, a recording of this webinar will be posted at lucidea.com, and it's lucidea.com/archivera/resources. First, a few things about Lucidea. So we are a relatively new knowledge management company, focuses on bringing you the best solutions from around the world. But we are comprised of series of products and companies that have joined Lucidea over the last 30 years. These brands include well-known products such as Argus, Sydney in Magic, Archivera, Eloquent, and QuadraStar. Well, obviously, we're all here today because we want to learn more about the intricacies of an archival collection management system and how it would help your archival work. Well, you're in good hands. I would like to talk to you about our presenter, Margot Note. Margot Note has over 20 years of experience in information work in the national and international sectors. She's an author, a certified archivist, a certified records manager, an information governance professional, and project management professional. Her credentials speaks volumes and for themselves. Before I hand off to Margot, though, please be aware Margot's book, The Archivist's Advantage, Choosing the Right Collections Management System, will be available in both hard copy and download, courtesy of Lucidea Press. I'm actually very excited for it to be coming out soon. So if you are not a subscriber yet to our blog posts and such, this is another reason to be, because we let our subscribers know first thing when an exciting thing such as a published book of value does come out. Margot, it is nice to have you with us. It is an honor to work with you. We look forward to today's session. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for today's webinar, Improving Archival Work Through Collections Management System, Margot Note.
Thank you so much, and I'm so happy everyone could join us today. So I have a lot of information to share, but I think the first slide that's really important is talking about why we would use a collections management system. First of all, it offers ease, availability, and access. It makes our lives easier as archivists. It also maximizes our accuracy and flexibility because we have one place to store this information and to make it accessible. And I think the most important part is that there's automated systems with robust capabilities. It allows us to automate some of the everyday administrative work that we do, that we can really concentrate our efforts and our mind power in doing really high level, deep archival work. So archival systems for collections are important because they have customizable industry standard metadata profiles. They also support authority lists, hierarchical vocabularies, and relationships. If you have collections that are specific to locations, there can be geolocation cataloging available. There's image navigation that allows you to pan through images or to zoom to get more focused on these images. There's tagging and comment capabilities, so your users can make research comments or tag things that make sense for them. And then there's also multilingual interfaces. So now I think more than ever, there's collections that are multiple languages. So it allows much more access points to the collection versus, let's say, one language. So you have to decide when that change is necessary, and it's usually there has to be some pain points or a reason why you're saying we have to change the way that we do archival work because what's working right now is not working. So you have to ask yourself some questions. The first is how many resources should be dedicated? And those resources can be time, labor, money, staffing. So you might, if you're deciding to implement a system, you might be hiring consultants, hiring vendors, maybe part-time staff, full-time staff, project staff. You also want to think about the strategies that you'll deploy in order to implement the system. Another question is how you measure the value of the investment? Because investing in a collections management system, there's kind of that initial investment, but we're investing in the system to improve work and to really have a return of that investment over time. So how are you going to decide what that value is? And I think the most important question and what it really comes down to is how do you persuade your leaders? As archivists, we know that we need better systems and we need the databases that help us do our work. But a lot of our work is kind of mysterious to the powers that be within an organization, the people that make the decisions, that control budgets, that perhaps write grant proposals for your work. So we have to learn how to persuade our leaders that this change is very necessary. And I should say that not deciding to move forward is also a decision. It's a passive decision, but it's a decision. I think there's a fear that whatever you choose today is going to be immediately outdated when you're dealing with technology. And I think that that's a legitimate fear. I totally understand that. But a lot of systems that you might be looking at are going to have updates and improvements and upgrades over time that will always keep you current. You also have to consider the cost of the status quo. So if you're continuing to work the way that you work, you know, you might not be investing in the system, but how are you wasting money or how is time or resources being wasted in the current status quo? And another thing to think about is the idea of subpar or non-existent systems cost money. So if you have a very complicated workflow to process collections, or if your data has to travel very clunkily through legacy systems, there is a money drain that happens with those systems as well that you need to be aware of. There are deficient practices when you don't have a collections management system. For example, collections can be backlogged, unavailable, or unknown. You might not have a really obvious way to keep inventory of what you actually have, which can be distressing. That also leads to a high risk of damage, missing, or stolen items because things aren't tracked. People are using collections. Maybe you're looking at collections, you're donating your collection to be used at another institution for a short period of time. And so you're not really tracking that. So there's this possibility of some missing or stolen items. There's also poor donor relations. So if you take on a collection and because your systems are slow and clunky, and it just requires more time, you're not going to be able to process those collections as quick as you could with a high functioning system. And that can definitely have an impact on how donors feel about your collection, your processing. So that can have a very kind of poor impact on those relationships. And then of course, work is more laborious. And I think the archival profession, I think, is unique in the sense that it requires so much physical work and also intellectual work. And a lot of archivists and organizations, and I speak from experience, they're working at organizations where they're understaffed and they're overworked. So any additional effort to do that work, it just compounds over time. So we want to make that work much more efficient with using proper systems. There's access impacts that happen too when you have deficient systems. For example, there might be only on-site usage available. So maybe collections aren't online or it's very difficult to find them online and they have to physically go to your site to look at the archival material. And your site, for example, might be closed, temporary closed, under renovations. There's travel costs involved and time, so that can add up and having less access. There can also be underutilized or ignored guides. So if your finding aids or any type of inventory that you have is kind of complicated to use, people are just going to ignore them or not use them. There could be non-standard or non-current descriptions, so you're not keeping up to date with the descriptions of the collections, and they're not kind of in best practice, so it's more difficult to find these collections overall. And then there's staff-dependent access and the loss of institutional memory. And so this happens when, especially if you have collections that require the archivist to know all different systems and look in all different places for information, any type of access to the collection requires the engagement of the archivist, a lot of time in that engagement. But then if that archivist leaves, let's say they move on to another position, they retire, they win the lottery, they're gone, there's a whole loss of that institutional memory and knowledge that leaves with them that is not replaceable. And that really impacts access. From the user perspective, when there's not a standard or straightforward way of accessing the collection, there's going to be a pretty frustrating experience that they encounter. So there might be a confusing search process to look at these collections, and they won't, for example, be able to explore all the collections at once. They might have to look in each separate collection and not have a global search. And whether or not we agree or accept it, users come into archives and use archival websites, for example, with the expectation that they're going to work like a Google search. That's just basically the default of access. So anything that's like more complicated than that is just going to have barriers to the discovery of the collections, and it leads to frustration and intimidation. I think many people may not be used to working at archives. There's a lot of unique ways that we organize information and the ways that we do things that for us as archivists are, we don't think about. But for a new user, or maybe an advanced user that's feeling intimidated, they're just going to see that as just a frustrating and intimidating experience. And we want to be much more welcoming to users to use our collections. That's the whole purpose of keeping archival collections together, is to have access. So if you don't have a collections management system, you might be working with these kind of jerry-rigged methods. So Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, access databases, and legacy systems of who knows what created these systems. And so again, I speak from experience where when I was a lone arranger of an international nonprofit, so I was a one-person archivist department, I tracked information in all these different free systems. Like I had this access database, I had finding aids in Word documents and spreadsheets where I kept metadata, and I tried to do the best I can with all these different methods, but it was really somewhat chaotic, and it was very difficult to do a standard search or to find information because I had to have that deep knowledge of how each method worked, and it became much more complicated. So I do speak from experience where I know that feeling, and so it's really wonderful to have a system where everything is kept together in one place and you no longer have to look at all these different places for information. Some places, organizations have ad hoc systems, so they might be kind of homegrown databases, and they're very institution specific. And the methodology is known only to the creators. So people, perhaps years ago, with the best intentions, created these systems to work in that specific time period, and perhaps it worked for a certain amount of time. But as they left, the knowledge of those systems left, and they may or may not have documented their decisions or how these databases or systems worked. So all that information has left with them. And then new archivists coming into a position are really left adrift and trying to think about how these systems work. And the database, let's say when these systems were created, might have been the great, might have really worked for the collection at that time. It might not have been the perfect solution, but it was a workable solution. But as the database size increases, as collections become more complex, as archivists are asked to do more work, those methods that might have worked in the past become ineffective. And these systems also can inhibit uniform comprehensive access because they're maybe created for that specific institution and are more kind of faced inward to the users versus having more access to outside users. And there might be inaccurate, incomplete data because things weren't tracked over time. Maybe there's different methods of recording the information and that wasn't documented. So there's always going to be holes in that information that the system has. And then with legacy systems, you might have an outdated system. So perhaps years ago you invested in a collections management system, but maybe for whatever reason, there might be lacking customer support of that system. You might have had to necessitate workarounds to get this work done where, you're basically you're creating your workflows for the system rather than having the system support your natural workflows. And then there's like workarounds and workflows. It just becomes much more complicated to do straightforward work. Poor legacy systems have a number of problems. One is that the queries, searches, and reporting can become cumbersome over time. There's also this idea of technical debt. So instead of investing time and money to create a better system, you're investing your time and money in correcting a faulty system, and you're always kind of going to be in debt in the sense you're never going to make it perfect. You're just going to be always treading water. Sometimes legacy systems, depending on what they are, can prevent online collections. So they might be tracking information inside, but they might not sync very well with your website, or you might need some other system to get these materials on your website. And that, of course, limits the exposure to your collections. And ultimately, when you delay an upgrade that is going to happen eventually, it just makes the conversion longer and more expensive because there's more data within that system. So those were kind of the doom and gloom part of the webinar. Now I want to talk about the benefits of these systems. So we are really looking for collection management systems that are built specifically for archivists and our needs. Because a lot of time we have tolerated systems that are meant for others, like libraries and museum systems, which, with libraries and museums and archives, we do share a lot of ways of doing things and a lot of knowledge and perhaps some collections. But we as archivists have a specific way that we do things. And so these systems that are created for a bigger library or a museum are going to lack those things that we need, like archival templates and workflows, things that are very specific to our work. And so these systems allow us to manage the collections in a way that we feel good about, that work with the way that we think about collections and do our work. So archival collection management systems are created for us. They capture accession data very well. They use standards compliant description standards. They allow us to build and reorganize hierarchies of our information. And then we can generate encoded archival description finding aids with a push of a button. So there's no longer this changing things and waiting for it to be updated. We can immediately make changes, make things available, and have it immediately available to our users. Archival management systems, collection systems, also have centralized functions. So it adds efficiencies to workflows. So we're no longer going through, these workarounds or these kind of complicated ways of doing business. The system is created for the way that we do work, and it allows us to consult one system rather than multiple systems to update. And then we can describe materials following best practices. These collection management systems also allow us to have a better way of working. So we have a more productive use of resources, labor, and time, and improved efficiency in workflows. So I do want to take a moment just to talk about these two bullet points because I want to be very clear. by what I mean by this. So I'm not saying that archivists need to work faster or that we're not working hard enough. What I'm saying is that there's kind of these automated, or they should be automated everyday things that we do that are more administrative, that we spend time doing. And those little pockets of time add up. And what I'd rather have archivists do is, we are highly trained, highly educated. We do a lot of intellectual work, and I want the work that you do to be focused on the work that's going to move the archives forward. So things like publications, exhibitions, making things more accessible, processing things quicker, better time in replying to user requests, rather than kind of the everyday admin work. And that's what these systems can really handle very, very well. So there's also elimination of redundant data entry and effort. So you're not, updating things in multiple systems. You just have one system that you can update, press a button, and then everything is updated. And then there's also faster and more accurate reporting. And this is a really important point to mention, because our work sometimes as archivists is a little mysterious. And the powers that be, the people that create our budgets, that give us our promotions, really might not understand the specifics of what we do, but I think they would be more likely to understanding the metrics. So we're saying, our work is important, our work has value, but then we're also backing that up with numbers and facts. So we can see how many people used a specific collection, how many requests we had, how much hits we had on the web based on this reporting. And it's really helpful for us to really demonstrate our value with numbers that cannot be argued against. So I have to laugh at this slide because I do want archivists to be happier. And I think systems that work for us make things a lot easier. So there's a swifter onboarding of staff. So this could be full-time staff, part-time staff, if you have volunteers, interns, work study students, whoever you have working for your organization. Because there is a system that makes sense, there can be tutorials and training. So people that are working with the collections, they're going to have less of a the time that it takes for them to get really familiar with the way of doing work is going to be much shorter, because that onboarding is going to be faster. There's going to be better donor relationships because things are going to be processed easier. They're going to be more accessible. You'll be able to say, hey, look, the materials that you donated to us, we had X amount of people using this collection in a certain amount of time. That just makes happier donors, which is very important. There's also greater visibility and more patron awareness, because it's going to be easy to use these systems. There's going to be greater access and awareness. And then there's increased institutional buy-in, because not only, you're going to raise the awareness of these collections to patrons and users, but a lot of times, just depending on what kind of organization you work in, a lot of people that work in that organization are the power users of the archives. So you want to make their life easier. So instead of them perhaps having, a difficult time accessing these collections or information about these collections, if they see the system work so much faster, so much easier, there's going to be a buzz about the archives and a tremendous amount of buy-in, which is super important. There's also the potential for growth, partnerships, and outreach, because things are going to be more accessible. I think partnerships are something that's really important, because if you have a system that makes things more standardized, that make things more easier to access, you're going to have a better probability of having a really good partner with another organization for whatever projects you're working at. And that helps raise your awareness of the organization. And then it also helps minimize costs, because you're sharing them with a partner. It just makes those relationships just so much stronger and better. There's increased access. This is the huge part of systems. So there's enriched searching across collections. You're no longer doing these kind of complicated or weird searches. You're doing, a search globally across collections to see parts of what you are holding that's going to help this research use. There's also expanded accessibility to the collections. Um, Two other points that I think are really important are uniform request responses and efficient email integration. So you'll be able to answer queries faster. You might use request templates, so you're not spending your time recreating the same answer over and over again. You're just being that much more accessible to the users that are reaching out to you. And of course, there's increased research and educational opportunities that happen just naturally out of increased access. And there's also easier work. So it's great to have people, users benefit, but I want to make sure that archivists benefit too. So there's better standards application when you're working with systems. There's more granular responsive arrangement that you can do and increased description levels. I think if you're doing something like more product, less process, MPLP, or you're processing things to a certain level, which is fine for most collections, you can, let's say, run reports and see what the users are really using in the collection, and then decide, okay, these are the really popular kind of pockets or series that are sub-series of the collections. Let's do more a description of these sections to have even more access. So then you can really get that that feedback that you need to make things even more accessible. And then there's faster automated publication and finding aid edits. So if you do this work of more description, for example, or if you want to add to the collection, it's just a simple matter of entering the information, pressing a button, and that finding aid is immediately updated in real time. There's also more control. So I love the idea that these systems have enhanced usage and request statistics, because we can really back up our justifications of budgets and resources with metrics. We can show the value of our work, especially online. I think that's really important, because a lot of the people that are making these decisions about how to increase your budget, they might not be physically in your archives, and especially if things are done online, you don't, people in power don't necessarily see that. So that's why these reporting capabilities are very important, and these statistics are important. There's also improved preservation and security, because you'll have better inventory of what you have. You can track it. You can see who's accessing the collections, where was it used, when was it used. You can also track a lot of information about the condition of specific parts of the collection. Perhaps they need conservation treatment, or they need more preservation focus. So you can really track that information in a way that's going to have a huge impact on the quality of your collections. So how users perceive a CMS, I think, is interesting, because I don't think they would necessarily realize, oh, there's a new system being used here, there's a new database, but they will feel the effects. So they'll be able to search and browse the holding descriptions much more easier, and they'll be able to work independently. So if you have a very robust collection management system that has a lot of information, the users can work independently and figure out what they're looking for much easier. So then they'll always only reach out to you when they have a very specific, complicated question. So it reduces the institutional knowledge that's needed for these collections, because it'll be more obvious to the user what these collections are. And so what I mean by that is that instead of, let's say you're a reference archivist, instead of answering the same questions over and over again, if a CMS is there, that things are organized and users can find that information easier, you're going to be more focused on answering those questions that really require research, that are really unique, and that are giving the most benefit. You're not wasting your time in answering very obvious repetitive questions, because your user is going to be able to be independently figuring that out on their own. And I think that's really important. A lot of people don't necessarily want to engage or even feel comfortable asking for help. So it allows the researcher to be independent, and we can help support them when they really need our specific assistance. So in order to get a collections management system, you really need to get people on board. And these are, people that have high-level institutional buy-in, because you're looking at, let's say, an executive director, a president, a CEO, a COO, or VPs in your organization. Each organization is different, but there's going to be people that are the decision makers in your organization, and they have to be passionate and pumped about getting these systems, because as archivists, we know that we need these systems, but it's sometimes going to be harder to make that case to people that make those decisions. So we need initial and ongoing support from senior management positions. And then we want to be able to justify the project to stakeholders. And a lot of times that means getting a executive sponsor for the project. So someone in the organization that has enough power and sway within the organization that they're behind this project, that just helps open the doors and make the work to implement this system much easier. So a lot of times we have to make a business case. So we're not just saying we need a system, we have to kind of justify it. And we want to emphasize the value of a collections management system to the institution and the communities. So both the organization and the outside community of users. And so that's going to be very unique to your organization. And by working there, you'll have some context to see, okay, what can I say, or how can I position this project in a way that I can get a yes to move forward? So I've talked about in this presentation all the problems that not having this system has and all the benefits that a system can give you. But there's some other things to think about too. So a big talking point is quicker and accurate retrieval. You're going to be able with this system to retrieve information faster. It's going to be accurate. It's going to be more instantaneous. You're going to make users happier. You're also reducing the labor and operating costs in the sense that you're not wasting your time in doing these workflows or workarounds, or the work that you're doing is going to be much more streamlined, and that's going to allow you to save money and labor and instead invest that time and labor in stuff that's really going to help the organization and the archives. Part of the business case also is addressing strategic needs. So that, again, is looking at the needs of your organization, what they want to do that they can't do right now, that a system will help them reach those goals, and might mean looking at a mission statement or a vision statement or a strategic plan and being very obvious and connecting those dots, almost too obvious, and saying this system is going to help us do, all these points in the strategic plan. And then you want to have the context of the why and how of the project. So why are you doing this project right now? What's the reason? And then how. You might not have all the details of how, because that's going to require planning and thinking about things and doing due diligence, but you really want to focus on why this matters right now and why we can't wait any longer, and we have to make this change and implementing these systems. And then, of course, it always comes down to money. So we want to justify the expenditures. And so that, again, is looking at the return of investment. So setting up a system and implementing it will cost money in that initial investment. And then there's going to be ongoing money that's going to keep the system going. And those can be, depending on what type of organization you work at, those can be significant expenses, but we want to make sure that there's a return of investment. So we're investing that money, and we're not just getting the system just because, we're getting the system because ultimately it's going to save us time and money and effort later on, and it's going to give us many more benefits by having this system. And so I think, again, you have to really connect the dots between the investment and making it worth it, making it so people understand that this is a really good investment of money and time and labor, and it's ultimately going to benefit the organization to do this project right now.
Thank you, Margot. Speaking of investment, thank you for investing time to actually share this valuable information with all of us. Clearly, for our attendees, you have reached this far because improving your archival work is important to you. So if you like to leverage this insights and all the information that Margot Note talked about, um, from this presentation, feel free to reach out. Now, Margot, where is the best place for the audience or the attendees to reach out to you?
They can definitely look at my website. So that's margotnote.com. I have contact information there. I have a bunch of blog posts. I have an incredible amount of information, and they can certainly contact me through my website.
That's great. Awesome. And also, as the screen shows, if you have any more question, any more information about Lucidea, send us an email as well. Even let us know any possible challenges you might have. If nothing else, we do appreciate feedback from you about any content we produce. One thing to note though, when you reach out to us, we do prioritize discovering your needs and wants and not just sell you a system that may not work for your organization. As Margot Note mentioned, archival systems supposed to be created for you. So on the screen shows, contact us at 1-604-278-6717 or send us an email at sales@lucidia.com. Check us out at lucidia.com/contact. On behalf of Lucidia, thank you for joining us for today's presentation. We look forward to speaking with you sometime soon. Bye for now.